Finding worms in your dog is alarming, to say the least. We want to explore what worms are, where you find them inside and outside of your dog, and then also how to prevent and treat them from a holistic perspective.
There are some common worms that are often found in dogs, and then there's stuff that's really uncommon. So we're only going to talk about the common ones. The common ones are pretty much roundworms, hookworms, whipworms, and tapeworms. The uncommon ones would be things like lungworms and bladderworms, but that's so remote. Those things are just very unlikely to be an issue. Roundworms are probably the most common one. So roundworms are nematodes, and that is the class of worms that includes the roundworms, and they basically kind of all look the same. They all look like spaghetti. So a heartworm is also a type of roundworm, but you're not going to see it because it stays on the inside. But it is pretty common, I'll say, for people to, you bring home a new puppy or kitten, and then you think everything's going fine, and it either barfs up or poops out a pile of living worms. Sometimes they're dead, sometimes they're alive, and they're squiggling around. Or when you take them in for their first vet visit or second vet visit, and they check a poop sample, and the vet comes back in and tells you your puppy has hookworms, your puppy has whipworms, your puppy has roundworms. And so, in general, most of those worms are carried into the puppies through the placenta. So they are in the adult dogs, but they're not in their intestines. In the puppy, they're going to end up being intestinal worms. In the adult dogs, they're hiding out in a dormant larval form in their muscle tissues. So they're basically undetectable. You could check poop samples on the adult dogs, but they're otherwise healthy. They don't have worms in their intestines. The worms are not producing eggs, and so they are going to test negative. You'll never find worms in the adults. Their bodies are able to control where the worms are and kind of keep them in that dormant state. At some stage of pregnancy, some hormone clicks on and the worms emerge from their dormant state and complete their mission, which is to cross the placenta and get into the puppy. And that's how puppies are often born with worms. And so it doesn't mean that the breeder's house was dirty. It doesn't mean that the puppies were not well cared for. It's like this unavoidable thing that sometimes happens. For the most part, the only ones that you can actually see are roundworms. And if there's not too many of them, then you won't see them, but eggs might be found on the poop sample that the veterinarian checks. If your puppy does barf up or poop out roundworms, it means that there are a lot of them, and the excess ones are basically being voted off the island. There's just not enough room for them, and so they get kind of forcibly ejected. Hookworms and whipworms, you can't see them, but the eggs might be found in the feces. And then tapeworms, the poop sample is not a good test for tapeworms. Most of the time, tapeworms are identified because little segments full of eggs that they're not the actual tapeworm, but they're parts of the tapeworm, and they move like inchworms, and they crawl out of the puppy's rear end and kind of cruise around the world. Sometimes they dry up, and then they kind of look like big grains of rice. So tapeworm is a kind of flatworm, unlike the other ones. Adult dogs can also sometimes pick up tapeworms from if they eat mice and bunnies kind of on their own, like if your dog is somewhat of a hunter and likes to provide their own food. That's another way that they can, that's typically how they're going to get tapeworms. But again, the tapeworms don't release eggs in the intestines, so that's why those eggs do not show up on a poop sample. The main way that they're identified is because you see these little rectangular white things that are kind of crawling around in a weird way. And yes, they're gross. It is true. So that, other than eating wildlife or having these worms cross the placenta, how would your puppy get them? So, sometimes dogs randomly pick up some of these things by eating soil, which is normal for dogs. That's how they get minerals. So sometimes the worms are hiding out in there. And then again, sometimes by eating wildlife. For hookworms can really infest the soil in your yard if you live in kind of a warmer environment that we do. And if the soil, like if only the top part of the soil freezes in winter, or if it doesn't freeze, then those worms can survive through the winter. Whereas in Minnesota, we definitely have a deep freeze, so it has to be at least 12 inches of soil that freezes. And then the good news is you don't have to scrape up the top of your yard and burn it to get rid of the hookworms. But out of all of them, the hookworms are the one that are kind of a risk to humans because they can infest the soil in your yard where the dogs poo, and don't walk out there barefoot. Sometimes, if your dog poops outside and you want to go back in the house to get a bag to pick it up or something, or whoever's duty it is to pick up the poop, doesn't get around to it for a few days, and then you go out and there's the poo and there's a worm on it. There are worms in the environment, and so unless you actually see the worm come out when your dog poops, you don't really know where the worm came from. There are roundworms in your yard, in the grass, in the soil, that are supposed to be there, so they're a natural part of the ecosystem. So if you look at your dog's poo later and there's a worm on it, it doesn't mean that your dog has worms. And then the other thing that I'll say is that it's very typical, like a common deworming protocol for roundworms would be 2 doses of pyrantel pamoate, which, as far as drugs go, it's a very safe drug, given 3 weeks apart. If your puppy has barfed up or pooped out roundworms, 2 treatments is not going to be enough. I would literally do 6. I've seen some heavily infested animals that had weird symptoms, like even neurological stuff or chronic respiratory stuff. And it was because even after a couple of doses, they still had worms. And so it might not be in a heavily infested animal or a very compromised puppy or a weak puppy or something like that. This is something that you might want to repeat, maybe for 2 or 3 months, just to make sure that you've really helped them overcome the worms. Not all dogs are susceptible to worms.
There's dogs that are higher at risk, and it's really only a few categories. And so obviously the first one is that we talked about is going to be your puppies. Puppies are just very susceptible to worms. And most of the time it's going to be because they got them through the placenta from the mother. Otherwise, you're going to look at dogs that do kind of catch their own live prey. Wild game are just known to carry parasites, and intestinal worms is just part of that camp. And then lastly, it's going to be a dog that has a much weaker digestive system, aka immune system, and so they're just going to be much more susceptible to getting these parasites. The good news is that there is a decent amount that you can do to really be proactive and prevent these things. So, as a breeder, I raised all of my moms naturally. And so I had very healthy moms. And then as the litters would come, I would always make it a point to, again, be proactive and do a deworming protocol that was natural with them. I never used a chemical dewormer. I didn't want to bring harm to them in any way. So I made sure to do it only using supplements and homeopathy and certain foods are good for deworming as well. And I am proud to say that in 7 years of natural rearing, breeding and 51 puppies, never once did we have a case of worms. Never once did I get a phone call from a puppy family after the puppy got home and say, oh, the vet found worms in the stool. And so the idea that every puppy is born with worms is often, I think it's a false myth that's pushed. That's actually not true. I think it's very common, but most dogs are raised traditionally, and so that would lend itself to be more affected by parasites. And so whether it is a litter of puppies, a puppy that you just brought home, or maybe one of these adults that's more at risk, there is a holistic protocol that you can use in over like a 5-day span. And it's the exact same protocol that we would actually encourage you to use for treatment if you actually did find an infestation of worms in your animal. This protocol is, so we really wanted to give a really good resource for all things parasite prevention and treatment from a holistic perspective, because it is something that's very difficult to find. And so if you go into onto our website, you'll find a parasite prevention and treatment guide. It is all, just some good explanation, good information, kind of like what we're giving here about different parasites, including fleas, ticks, heartworm, like all the things, and different ways that you can prevent and treat without using chemicals or harmful drugs. And so you will actually find that protocol in there that you can use proactively as a natural dewormer, or as a longer protocol to actually treat a case of worms.
Right, and that's kind of the bottom line. I mean, we were taught in vet school that all puppies and kittens are born with worms. But really what it comes down to, it's a matter of intestinal integrity. So basically out of a litter, the puppies that aren't doing as well for whatever reason, right? There's always going to be stronger puppies and weaker puppies. And so to some extent, it is going to be kind of the weaker puppies that accumulate more parasites. While they're very young, that's when they're building their intestinal integrity. Their microbiome is kind of starting to be put together. Their immune system, the little immune system is trying to come on board. And so that's why it's important to address intestinal integrity, basically make sure that they have a strong gut. That's what's going to help them resist parasites. And so, for example, if it comes to something like regular deworming protocols, some people are very worried about worms, or they know that their dogs are out there eating critters and stuff like that. And so you could use the exact same deworming protocol that's in the guide if you wanted to use it maybe twice a year, spring and fall, or on a seasonal basis 4 times a year. I personally do not deworm my own dogs, just because I don't have dogs who do that. You know, they're so well fed. Goodness. They're not out there eating stuff.
Nope.
And then when it comes to like non-worm parasites, so these single-celled organisms, Giardia and Coccidia, with those, so let's say you have a dog who's having normal stool, the dog is not having diarrhea. You bring the annual poop sample into the vet and they say, aha, Giardia, or aha, Coccidia. If the dog is not having diarrhea, treatment is not necessary, nor is it recommended, because that means that those parasites are just passing through. And the successful immune system is saying, bye guys, keep moving, don't stick around. Whereas if you have a dog who is sick or is having diarrhea and you find those parasites, it's not just about killing the parasites. Like, yes, you need to treat for those things, but at the same time, you need to say, oh, my dog's gut integrity is lousy. I need to do something about this. And so that's kind of the main point.
So really, so we've kind of covered, that there is a proactive protocol you can use that's also, you can stretch it out and do it over a longer period of time that could be for treatment. But really the best, we want to talk about prevention for a minute, because we're all about being proactive and preventing a problem before it starts. And so your best option for that, whether you have a puppy, whether you have an adult, is to really build that iron gut and a healthy digestive system. The first step to that is to do a really good gut reset protocol. And then really it's going to be, continuing to foster that by making sure they're on a balanced raw diet. You're not hampering digestion with unnecessary carbohydrates. You're not hindering it with, toxic chemicals. All those things affect the gut microbiome. And so if we can build and keep that gut microbiome thriving and healthy, that's going to be your best form of prevention, whether it's a puppy or an adult. We have an excellent gut reset protocol that we put together. You can find it in our free holistic intro guide. It's also a part of our raw feeding guide because we really also like it to prepare the gut to transition from kibble to raw. It's just a really nice way to make sure that that transition is going to be as smooth as it can be, especially if it's a dog that's eaten kibble for a long time or maybe been really compromised, like they've gone through a lot, you know, from a shelter or something like that. You really want to try and stabilize that gut before you just start introducing raw food. So that's something, but all of these different things that we're mentioning, we will always link them down below. So you can certainly go to our website and check those out. But really, you know, the point of all of this is worms are icky. None of us like to deal with them, but they're not the end of the world. And there's actually natural ways to treat them as well as prevent them.